good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining us in the world. Thank you very much for logging on to listen to the second Surgical Holdings educational webinar. I hope everyone's keeping well in these difficult times. I'm delighted to have Professor Alistair Kean joining us today, who's going to give a really interesting presentation on nanosurfaces from a medical devices perspective. Also, very pleased to have Hank Balch joining us, who from the States. So Hank is the founder of Beyond Clean, and if you don't know about Beyond Clean, then you should do. It's the one and only, or the premium podcast from a decontamination perspective for me that I tracked down first of all on LinkedIn, downloaded in 135 countries. And with over, I believe, I understand from Hank's point of view, nearly 250,000 downloads now, Hank. So it's going very well. They do everything from an educational perspective. So yeah, welcome to Hank, and a bit more about Alistair now. So Alistair's a professor, as I mentioned, of medical nanotechnology. He's from the University of Highlands and Islands, and he'll give you a bit more in his intro about that and about his position and what he's done and his history. He has quite a resume, so I'm sure that'll be interesting reading on its own. I'm gonna, when we kick off the presentations, once again, I'm gonna block out my camera so you can actually just enjoy the presentation and not have to look at me throughout it. And then we're gonna pick up after for some questions. There's you should have a control panel which allows you to send questions as we go along. So if you'd like to do that, we can pick those up at the end. And then if we get a bit of time, we'll do some open mic questioning as well. So I'll hand over to Alistair now, and we'll enjoy, and we'll speak shortly.
Thank you very much, Dan, for that lovely introduction, and Hank as well. So you don't have to see my summer house, which I'm based in now. I'm going to switch off my camera, so you can enjoy the presentation on its own. Okay, so this is my first ever webinar. It's very exciting. Probably going to be the first of many I give in the future. I'm probably going to embarrass Dan a little bit, so sorry, Dan, but I first met Dan about 12-14 years ago when I was working for a company called Mantis, and we put in a European grant application, multi-billion-dollar, to look at a prototype mass production of nanomaterials. And at that stage, we were looking for some end users. And at that time, I thought, well as electronics, photovoltaics, I think there would be some real useful stuff to be done in medical devices. So I sent an email out to somewhere around 40 or 50 medical companies in the UK. And I only got one answer, and it was from Dan. And ever since then, we've been good friends, and then we continue to work together. So thank you again, Dan. My background is in physics. I've got a number of positions. I'm not trained medically. My main interest now is in life sciences and healthcare, but that's not my background. My background is physics based. So I studied physics at university. I worked at the universities of study at Strathclyde St Andrews. I was a postdoc in Cambridge and Glasgow, but mainly working on crystalline electronic devices. Then I moved into the commercial world in '92, went to Sharp Corporation in Oxford, and from then worked with another few companies, again in the area of physics and materials. But one extremely thing happened in about 2006 or 7 when working at Mantis. We started to develop this process for generating nanomaterials by using our technology. And that was a bit of a revelation, because it transported me from a kind of two-dimensional layered world to a three-dimensional world. And in that way, you can much more replicate what happens in natures, and that excited me a lot. I'd left my last proper job probably in 2013, and presently I'm involved in a few different things and different places, but everything is interrelated, which you'll see as we move along. So I set up my own company, NikaWorks, in 2013 to do two things mainly. One was to work with people in nanotechnology consultancy, and also because of the knowledge and contacts I have, I can help a lot of people who have trouble with surfaces and would like to protect them via coating. I specialize in PVD, which is physical vapor deposition. We'll go into that a little bit more detail shortly. 2017, I was lucky enough to be invited to take part in some research at Manchester Metropolitan University. So I'm a visiting professor there. We look at clever ways of coating powder and photocatalytic materials. Last year, I was invited to join the University of the Highlands and Islands in Inverness, and that is an incredibly exciting multi-million-dollar project, which I'll summarize in a few slides at the end of this presentation. And then last year, I joined with some of my old colleagues from Mantis, and we set up a really exciting new company making pretty much a world first scientific instrument, allowing you to deposit nanoparticles at the touch of a button. Really clever. We'll just have a picture of that later on. And also I'm involved with a company called Polycat UK, where we're using chemical processes to enable nano functionalization of materials. So surface coating technologies. So there are many different ways to coat surfaces. There are dipping processes, there are plating, electroplating, plating, there's powder spraying, plasma spraying, all kinds of different ways of coating surfaces. But when you think of a coating, it is essentially a thin film. So in the UK, if you open a bag of crisps, in the US, you open a bag of chips. Inside, there's a protective aluminium coating, which is there to stop your crisps or chips going soggy, soaking up water. That's a oxygen water barrier layer, and it's very thin. It's only about 30, 40 nanometers, but that's essentially a thin film. I'll describe some of these, but later on in the presentation, I want to move us from the world of two-dimensional thin films, which have been around for many, many decades, into this new world of nanostructured coatings, and it really is a different world. We're beginning to see some tremendous applications, and I'll highlight some of the areas I'm working in and future areas that I want to look at. So PVD has its uses. It's in pretty much every industry around the world. It's used for photovoltaics, used for electronics, used in microelectronics, used in automotive, and on the bottom right-hand side, you'll see that it's going to be used everywhere in the Internet of Things as devices get smaller and more clever. This is a schematic. It's probably the most technical we're going to get in this presentation, but it just describes magnetron sputtering, and this is how you take your product and coat it with a new material. In order to enable PVD, we need a vacuum chamber. We need to generate material that we will deposit, and that's done by generating a plasma. We saw the picture of that earlier. We then excite the ions in that plasma and accelerate them towards the sputtering target. You can see there, that's the material that we want to deposit. The argon hits that sputter target. The sputtering target emits atoms and ions, and these are directed towards the substrate or your product, and we coat that with a thin film. One thing about physical vapor deposition is that it provides the the hardest, the densest materials available by any technology. And that's why it's used in the oil and gas industry to coat things like drill bits. Another thing about physical vapor deposition is that before we actually coat a piece, an engineering piece or a piece part, that piece itself is subject to a plasma cleaning process. And that means that we actually sputter material from the product, just a few atoms, but it's enough to give you an atomically clean surface. And that means when we bring in our new atoms, we can make chemical bonds at the surface. So it's not like we're making a coating that is sticking down, we are joining the atoms together, and that's the big difference with PVD. And because we get such a dense, adherent, hard coating, that means that it doesn't have to be very thick. Typically, PVD coatings are about 0.5 micron. If you go to plating or other processes, you're up to tens, hundreds of microns, or even millimeters in some cases. So that's what makes PVD a little bit different. Scalability, it's scalable. The image here is from the internet, it's a Balch coater. So this is a PVD system that is used to coat food packaging, which I mentioned earlier. So this vacuum chamber will coat PET plastic material at a rate of about 1 kilometer a minute. So we can coat surfaces very economically. If we wanted to coat something like a surgical instrument, then it would just be a different geometry rather than a roll-to-roll system. We would have a what's called a batch coater, where you have a big box chamber, you open the door, put in all your devices, close the door, and coat them with the material that you're interested in. So what materials might we be interested in? Well, if you ever go to, again, Home Base in the UK, Home Depot in North America, look at some drill bits, you'll see that most of them nowadays have got a lovely gold coating. That gold coating is not gold because that would wear off. The gold coloration comes from combining titanium and nitrogen in our sputter process. Titanium nitride comes out a beautiful gold color, and that's used as a protective coating for many surfaces because its micro hardness is greater than stainless steel. So it gives some scratch resistance and reduced coefficient of friction if the conditions are correct. Dad Cool will recognize these instruments as being surgical holdings, and these have a beautiful black coating on them, which is formed by combining tungsten and carbon in the sputter process. That gives a very attractive, very hard black coating. Again, these can be used for identification, but physically there are benefits too for it. So that's important when it comes to consideration of reprocessing instruments to minimize for adhesion of things we don't want there. What we must do is minimize scratches, minimize surface area. If you can minimize surface area, you minimize the probability of something attaching to surface. Another thing at Nika Works we do is we work with a company called Bionic, who manufacture bionic hands in the UK, which are controlled by surface potential voltages picked up in the skin in the order of microvolts. So we work with these guys to make their surface skin contacts biocompatible. So presently they're made with stainless steel. Stainless steel can comprise of many different elements, including chromium and nickel, which can irritate the skin. So we take these contacts and we coat one side with gold, real gold, because we're looking for an extremely good ohmic contact for the skin signal. The other side, which you can see in this image, is the skin side of the electrode, which is coated with a titanium alloy. Again, very thin, about 500 nanometers, ultra hard, biocompatible. Another area we're looking at, which is popping up in its level of interest again, is the ability to put amorphous carbon onto surfaces in a form that is very similar to diamond, which is an sp3 bond. A diamond is a different carbon bond from materials like graphite. there were many studies on DLC coatings 10 to 15 years ago. One of the problems with diamond-like carbon coatings is that in the past they were enabled by using methane and a hot thermal plasma process. That process introduced, without going into too much detail, it introduced a latent strain when the sample cooled down from 400 or 500 centigrade to room temperature, and that inherent strain in the material caused delamination of the thin diamond coating in some cases. So I've been working with a company called, you can see their name there, Diamond Hard Surfaces. And Diamond Hard Surfaces have perfected a process where they separate the plasma from the product and use magnets and electric fields to accelerate carbon ions towards the surface. It is a non-thermal process, i.e. no thermal load is applied to the surface, which means that we can now coat surfaces and there is no thermal stress in the subsequent coating, and we're going to be looking at some very interesting applications of this coating. On the right-hand side of this presentation, of this slide, there's a triangle. I've taken out most of the detail, but essentially, bottom left is SP2, that's more graphitic-like material. The black spot at the top is when you get in a phase diagram much more towards a diamond-like coating. SP3 is diamond. Typical DLC is the white circle at the bottom, and the red circle is where we are with Diamond Hard Surfaces material. So we can see potential applications for that, and I'll describe later on how we're going to achieve that. I know Dan's keeping an eye on the time, as I am as well, so don't worry, Dan. Physical vapor deposition, it gives you colorations, bulk colorations, dependent on the elements that you mix up in there. So typically you'll get black, gold, bronze, silver colors. These colors come from the bulk color of the material, and that's what nature gives us in the elements that we put down. We can mix them up a bit and change them a little bit. If you see something that's got a primary color on it, like a green, a red, a blue, then it's not fundamentally a condensed PVD coating, and it won't have the properties of that PVD coating. You'll see in the bottom there's a blue product there. With PVD, it is possible to make a blue coating, but it uses different physics. Here we get an example of some of Dan's scissors coated with a purple coating. Now, I'm going to begin to move us now from truly thin film coatings, and I'm going to begin to nanostructure them. So this is moving into the 2D, and we'll move into the 3D. To achieve the coloration here, what we've done is we've deposited titanium nitride, which, as we've learned, is a gold color. And then what we've done is we've deposited on that titanium nitride a very thin layer of titanium dioxide. Titanium dioxide is transparent. So what we've done, in fact, is a little bit like, if you look at the bottom right-hand side, you'll see something that looks like a oil film and water, and that's exactly what we've done. If you put oil onto water, you get a interference with light, and the coloration of that reflection depends on the thickness of that oil film, and that's exactly what we've done with this PVD coating. That's great and it looks nice, but if you change the angle that you're looking at the oil, the color changes. Same with an instrument. If you look at that coating, which is blue, change the angle of view, it will change color. And also if you make a very slight indentation or scratch in that coating, the color will change. So it's not really suitable for instruments which will see some mechanical abuse. So that's a kind of adding a bit of 2D onto the coating. The rest of the presentation, we're going to move really into the world of nanotechnology. People always ask me, well, people ask me lots of things. One of the things he asked me is, you're a physicist, what is physics? And my answer to physics is extremely simple. Anything to do with energy is physics. Physics describes energy in all its beautiful manifestations. People ask me what nanotechnology is, and people can say nanotechnology is nano robots inside the body or gloop dust that will take over the world. That's all rubbish. Nanotechnology is nature. It's pure and simple. Nanotechnology operates on the scale of nature. Nanotechnology operates at the scale of about a few nanometers up to tens. The EU definition is anything less than 100 nanometers in dimension has a nanotechnology aspect to it. You look at nature and it operates exactly at that scale. Look at the present situation we're in with COVID-19, or 2 as it is known. That is a nanoparticle. COVID-2 is about 85 nanometers in diameter. So it is an organic nanoparticle, and that's why we can use nanotechnology to affect such things. So let's go back to nature for a minute. On the left, I saw in the advert for this talk the picture of this little guy. He's a desert beetle, commonly found in the Namib Desert in Africa, and he survives by using nanotechnology. We haven't designed it over a few months. Beetles have evolved it over millions of years. So that's beautiful Darwinian evolution, which is also described by one of my heroes, Alexander von Humboldt. And reading his biography has inspired me to think about writing a book in nature and nanotechnology. If we look at this beetle, he survives in a desert where there's virtually no water, just a few tiny droplets or molecules in the air. And this guy survives by having a hydrophilic part on its shell, which attracts what little amount of water there is. That builds up into a micro droplet, but before it gets a chance to evaporate or go away somewhere, it's channeled through periodic hydrophilic, hydrophobic structures down its shell and into its mouth. So that's a remarkable example of nature and nanotechnology. And in fact, that technology has been taken and via a technique called nano imprinting, that structure has been mimicked into materials which you can take into the desert, make a tent and collect water to drink in the morning, or you can generate surfaces or water containers that can extract water from a desert environment. Quite remarkable. On the right, there's a beautiful blue butterfly. The coloration of that is extraordinary. The material there is actually a dark grey or black material. The only reason it's blue is because it has nanostructured the protein structure on the outside surface of its wings. So if you look in an electron microscope, you will see something that looks like a field of antenna on the surface, and those antenna are like three-dimensional diffraction gratings, which gives it the beautiful iridescent structure you can see. Very similar to mother of pearl. If you look at mother of pearl, that's a natural nanostructure. And it's been around for a long time. I mean, about thousands of years, actually. If you lucky enough to be in good old England or Europe and look around the cathedrals and at the stained glass, these glasses were made up to 1,000 years or so ago, and at that time they discovered that they could make red stained glass by, in the molten glass process, they would put in some ore which can contain some gold, and it turned the glass red. And it's only recently that they've taken some of these stained glasses, looked at them in electron microscopes, and lo and behold, you can see nanoparticles in there. They just didn't know it. Same goes for Damascus steel, ultra hard, sharp blade. Researchers looked at that in an electron microscope and discovered laminated carbon nanotube structures in Damascus steel, and that's from their process of tempering the steel. Quite remarkable that gold film silver nanoparticles. Johnson Matthey, who I work with, have been making fuel cells for a very, very long time. They were looking at fuel cell structures almost 200 years ago. Only recently they're becoming economical, but these are all based on metallic nanostructured materials. So let's come to the present, okay? Nanomaterials, nanoparticle coatings are actually out there everywhere. So if you go into an electronics store, you'll see some of the big companies are now selling QLED TVs. So that refers to quantum light emitting diode television. Light emitting diode produces a color, and what the Q part stands for is a quantum dot. That is a semiconducting nanoparticle, and it can absorb light and re-emit it at a different wavelength in an extremely efficient way. So that's used to sharpen up contrast in the new next generation televisions. Used in sunscreen, textiles, imaging, medical, you name it, there's nano stuff that can go in there if it's not there already. Turning now to the more medical applications, there are going to be a lot out there. There's a lot of people working on it now. There are going to be a lot more people in the future. So just some snippets of areas that people will be working on. Electrodes for all kinds of devices for sensing. And what a nano-structured surface can do for you is, if I have a metal electrode and I'm trying to measure something, sensitivity is king. If we take a normal planar surface and then we nanostructure that with particles, we can increase the surface area of that surface by about 4 orders of magnitude, which is remarkable. But the key thing about nanotechnology is it's not that you're just increasing the surface area. When we make these nanostructures, because they're so small, classical physical laws begin to go a little bit weird in terms of quantum physics and chemistry, and also mechanical properties. And we can harness those to do some really clever things. There's anti-fouling, antimicrobial, viral. I'll go into a little bit more detail later. Optical detection, drug delivery, cell binding. I'm going to whiz on a bit now because I don't want to run out of time. So this is the physics technology that we use fundamentally to generate not atoms and thin films, but the nanoparticles and nanostructured coatings. That's how it works. I'm not going to describe it in any more detail. What's more interesting is what it looks like, the coating. On the left-hand side here, we've got some filter paper, which has been coated with our chip crisp packet technology with gold, from thin on the left to thick on the right, and you can see that we've got a gold coating. On the right-hand side, we've got the same thing where we've gone from thin to thick, but we've coated the surface with gold nanoparticles. It doesn't look like gold. It's dark grey in the right, which is a thick coating of gold nanoparticles. So it's a highly porous nanostructured huge surface area material. In the middle of the filter paper, you can see it's a kind of pinkish grey colour, and that's a quantum mechanical nanoplasmonic effect, which is a lot of words, but it just describes how excited I am about these kinds of materials. Where can nanoparticles, nanomaterials apply to? Well, that picture says it all. Pretty much where any material is used in a product where some surface interacts with something else, which is pretty much everyday life. Really, so on this picture here, we have we're using our physics technique to deposit very nice looking nanoparticles. You can see the bottom scale there. These are sitting at about 10, 15 nanometer diameter. One thing I should say, because we're using our physics process to deposit these, we get really clean semiconductor type deposition purity, as opposed to some chemical routes, which are what most people use now. You tend to get the particles bunching up and some contamination in there as well. But the key properties are we get huge surface areas, which means that for catalysis it's exciting, for electronics, plasmonics, which I mentioned, metasurfaces, which are very small synthesized materials which will be used in the Internet of Things, drug delivery, cell adhesion, the list just goes on and on. Just a demonstration of how we can control these things. So this is what's called a mass spectrum, measuring the size of the nanoparticle. Here we're making extremely small particles with just a few atoms. Here we're making relatively large nanoparticles. These are going up to tens of nanometers. And on the picture, the insert picture, where you're looking at one nanoparticle, we zoomed in with a transmission electron microscope, and you can see little dots inside the particle, which are images of where specific atomic sites are. So we can see how the atoms line up in nanoparticles. Some examples of what we can do. Okay, so this is an example of what could be done. So this is a stent. I'm sure many of you are aware of stents. So there's the possibility of using a nanoporous coating to control drug elution from a stent. By controlling the porosity of that material, the transport of the drug molecule through the nanomaterial can be controlled. Obviously, for a stent, these are expanded once they're inside the body, and it's important for that coating to remain intact during expansion of a stent. So there's a lot of study into such materials for drug elution. And you can see some example here of the drug elution rate being controlled by the properties of that nanoparticle, nanostructured coating. So what's probably a little bit more topical these days is antimicrobial surfaces, and these days also obviously antiviral surfaces, but we know there's a big difference between a microbe and a virus. I started working on antimicrobial surfaces about 15 years ago, just before I met Dan. I work closely with Professor Bill Keevil at Southampton University, who's presently working on the COVID problem. And I worked for many years with Bill on copper nanoparticles to generate antimicrobial surfaces. And then the next slide I deleted. The next slide was going to be hospital acquired infections and what a problem they are. And I looked at it and I thought, well, the world has changed. This is so old-fashioned. So I think what I'm going to do is just get into the technology and some of the data and some of the exciting projects we're going to work on. So what we're doing is we're using physical vapor deposition, which is this technique where we can coat drill bits. We know it's ultra hard. We know it's durable. We know we can scale it. We can coat crisp packets, and we know it's economical. So I'm working with a company based in Liverpool called Gencoa, and Gencoa have developed a antimicrobial surface. We've been working together for the past few years on this. What we discovered is it's known around the world that if you deposit a metal oxide material like titania, bi-PVD, bugs don't like it, and there is some antimicrobial activity. What we discovered, or rather Gencoa discovered, is that if we deposit a thin film of a metal oxide and then we use what's called an ion beam to impact the surface and give it a nanostructure, i.e. make it look a lot more like things you see in nature. In nature, nothing's perfectly flat. Well, maybe some things are, but things that are antimicrobial aren't. We discovered that if we nanostructured this surface to a specific morphology, then we increased the antimicrobial activity of this surface by a further 3 orders of magnitude. So we can now generate an ultra hard, inorganic, durable coating, which can provide a log 6 kill rate. The killing mechanism is not like copper or silver by transmission of ions through a cell wall and DNA destruction, the antimicrobial effect is really quite exciting. We still have to do the physics, the biophysics, to find out the exact mechanism, but what we believe is happening is that we have nanostructured the surface, and physics and Maxwell laws tell us that when we do this, we change the electrostatic environment of that surface. To turn it into plain old English, it means that we have very excited electrons at the surfaces, which can drive oxidative reactions, which bugs don't like. And it's reproducible and it's scalable. If we zoom in a little bit more, this is in terms of the topology, more of what we see is happening at the micro nanoscale. On the left-hand side, the electron micrograph, you can see the kind of scale of the surface we're looking at. If I use my clever deposition technology and made that surface extremely flat, almost atomically flat, there would be pretty much no antimicrobial activity. The surface we've got there looks pretty bad, but what nature has done over millions of years to develop things like beetles with surfaces like this, we've done in a matter of years and months to develop almost like a biomimetic nanotechnology surface, which has huge antimicrobial activity. This surface we are now moving into antiviral testing, and I'll be very excited to share viral testing when we get data back in that. We've had the material tested at various different institutes using different technologies, different methodologies, just to confirm that we see kill rates that are as reproduced between different laboratories. I'll return to this at the end of the presentation, but I'm aware of the time. I'm going to wrap up probably in about 15 minutes. These are, again, some of the antimicrobial tests. So turning now to PPE and what might be done here. I don't have any qualified product solutions yet, but I'm pleased to say that I'm working with a number of partners on various different projects to see what we can do quickly, short-term, medium-term, long-term, for virus problems, which are pandemic problems, which are going to return to us, unfortunately, periodically. So nanomaterials, as I've just explained previously, are being investigated as an active component for masks. You can use surfaces in clever ways. So a virus transmission, it doesn't transmit as a nanoparticle, as an 85 nanometer nanoparticle. The virus transmits mainly via droplets, which can be from half a micron up to tens of microns. So that's what we've got to think about. If you wear a mask, you don't want to filter everything out. You want to get air through. When you breathe, your lungs naturally need water in there. They can't dry out, or you'd suffer dramatically from that. So what we're looking at doing is thinking of technologies where we can generate masks, where you can have a good seal. You can then breathe air. You can let water molecules go through that filter. But if the material sees a droplet coming in, what we want to do is hang on to that droplet like the desert beetle does. Then we want to use nanotopology to take that droplet, potentially spread it out, make it more like a pancake, and provide access to the virus to a nanoactive material which will damage the coating or the core of that viral molecule. So that's a combination of several different nanotechnology approaches coming together for one aim. So as I said, viruses are essentially nanoparticles, and we can use our knowledge of nanomaterials, nanotechnology, and our expertise to work in this. So that's quite exciting. These are ongoing projects just now. And as I was writing that, I was thinking many years ago, I did some work with a colleague, Matt Israel, who's a professor at the University of Glasgow, So this is going back, about 7 years now. And he's a professor of cell biology, cell engineering. And he does a lot of work of thinking of, okay, I've got a cell, I've landed on a surface. Why should I stay here? Why should I live here? Where should I go? What direction should I propagate in? And we believe now that cells are extremely clever in terms of sensing and propagation. So we put together just an initial study, and I thought it would be quite topical to just show this. We decided to look at different surfaces and pick some cells, pick some different surfaces, and find out a surface that cells really didn't like sticking to, and that ended up being a shiny polycarbonate surface that we couldn't get anything to stick to. So Matt has sent me some of that material, and then we used our physics technology to coat that surface with gold nanoparticles, and you can see images at different magnification of these really nice gold nanoparticles. And then lo and behold, our cells all of a sudden decided they would like to land and stick in that surface. And the amazing thing we saw that was, if we put down cells of different size or different spacing, then we could affect how cell boundaries behaved, how cells divided. So that's just the beginning of scratching the surface, pardon the pun, of how we can begin to play with nanosurfaces and interact with biology, cell biology, essentially for the good of mankind as we move forward with this research. I said earlier on I wanted to introduce what I'd be doing in the future in this area. Well, I'm lucky enough that I've last year I took on a new professorship at the University of the Highlands and Islands up in North Scotland in Inverness. Inverness and the Highlands and Islands have been recipient of a city deal funding from Europe, London and Edinburgh to the tune of over £400 million for communications. We're building up the first ever centre of science in the north of Scotland, which will be focused on life sciences and healthcare. And we're going to build up a whole new research campus, which you can see in some of these images there, about 250 acres, and that's extremely exciting. And it will be wholly focused on life sciences and healthcare. We're going to be presently, there is an activity of about 70 staff in an existing building, which has been there for about 10 years. So we have existing work in disease management, diabetes, cardio, mental health, cancer, colorectal, smart health, because the use of data is going to be important, especially in areas where the population is spread out. And also one of the key areas will be looking at disease prevention, i.e. making people fit so they don't get ill in the first place. That's one of the primary aims. Let's keep the load off hospitals. This is the Inverness campus. So we're going to, on this new site, we're going to build an elective care research centre, a mini hospital with a ward for about 30 patients. So we'll be looking at working with the patients on implants, cancer, blood, cardiovascular. We're going to be building a government innovation centre, and we're going to be building an innovation centre for the life sciences for the university. And within that, here we are, within that building, we're going to be looking at fitness of patients to keep them healthy, but I'm also going to set up a department of medical nanotechnology. Here's the buildings. So this new area, medical nanotechnology, and I've already alluded to some of these things. We're going to be looking at antimicrobial coatings, and that's going to be in partnership with Gencoa. So we'll build up the technology there to allow us to generate antimicrobial surfaces for surgical instruments, for implants, for surgical robots. We're working with diamond hard surfaces and on the design of a system applied to medical devices, and we will base that in Inverness. And I'm going to build up new system where we will generate nanoparticles and generate new nanomaterials for life science research, looking at biocompatibility, drugs, inflammation, etc. We're also going to build up a photonics laboratory. Photonics is essentially the use of light to measure things and the use of light to do things. So we will be looking at new light sources, spanning the spectrum from about 200 nanometers right down to the UVC, up to tens of microns into the far infrared. These different wavelengths mean that you can do different things, good and bad things, and you have to be extremely careful. New kinds of detectors which allow us to measure photons one at a time using devices which are known as SPADs, single photon avalanche diodes, which means that we can measure non-scattered photons from inside of the body, generating incredible images. We'll be looking at using photons and light to do things like play with gateways through cell walls for drug therapies, stimulating drugs, stimulating cell growth, stimulating wound healing, all manners of things. That's very exciting. Third thing we're going to do is look at plasma. And I keep talking to medics and I have to say it's not blood we're looking at, it's physics plasma. So if you look up to the sky and see the sun, that is a plasma. Look up and see the stars, they're all plasma. In fact, most of the universe is in the state of a plasma. We are the exception. It's very unusual not to be in a state of a plasma. A plasma is essentially an ionized atom that is excited, or an electron that is excited. When it's excited, it gives out light. So that's how fluorescent tubes work. But we can apply plasma for medical applications. This is quite exciting for us. So the top right-hand side picture, you can see how we generate nanoparticles using physics. So I spent the past year or so working with some colleagues at Nicolite, and we've now developed this benchtop system now, where I could teach any one of you how to deposit such beautiful nanoparticles in about 5 minutes, essentially opening the door, putting in your sample, pressing a button. And that way we're hoping to get nanoparticle research out to the masses, and this instrument is designed to go into university government research labs. And we're offering free samples of copper oxide coating, nanoparticle coatings, or any other coating to anyone that is working on the present pandemic. Anything to do with viruses, get in touch with Nicolite and we will provide you with free samples. Another company I'm working with, Polycat, where we are generating a glove. So this is using chemistry. So this is a cotton glove. It looks silver because my colleague Bill Patterson has extremely clever chemistry, which allows him to seed the growth of a nanoparticle on the surface of a fiber. That's very important because if we impregnate the nanoparticle, it might be inactive. But we've just learned this morning that we are getting very significant antimicrobial activity with this glove, very high, but we have to confirm that. And that glove is going into antiviral testing as well. So this is a glove that's reusable, breathable, and it's very comfortable to use in everyday life. So I hope I've given you a taste of nanotechnology. Look up the biography of Alexander von Humboldt. It's a riveting read. Think about nature and nanotechnology. I'm going to be involved in a lot of exciting projects, so I don't think I'm ever going to retire. They'll have to take me out the wheelbarrow. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. So thanks to Dan for inviting me, and Hank for being here as well. I'm just going to wrap up and go to the allotment and start digging in some vegetables. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Stay home. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Alistair. I don't know if you're still on the line there.
I'm here.
Yeah, cool. Okay, I did it. So amazing presentation. Really appreciate that. And I've heard versions of the presentation before, but you always see some other application that sort of just blows your mind in terms of what's possible. We've had a few questions in, and I say a couple of questions. I'm sure there are others. Obviously, we've got Hank on the line, and I'll open the mic up in a sec. But I just want to so first of all, we've got David Broderick, who has asked a question. He said, if the coating is much harder than the substrate material, would you get cracking as a result of microflexing on the base material? And I presume we're talking about sort of things like implants and obviously sort of stainless steel surgical instruments on the sort of 2D coating side of things.
Yeah, that's an extremely good question. Thanks for that. So what you have to understand is what micro hardness is and what bulk hardness is. So with our diamond process, people have sent us emails saying, if I send you this bit of plastic and you coat it with diamond, will it be like a diamond? And the answer to that is absolutely no, it won't be like a diamond. It will behave like a bit of plastic. So micro hardness gives you the scratch resistance on the micro scale. So the question about flex is correct as well. So if the substrate underneath the coating does not flex, then you're okay. If it flexes a lot, then you can damage the coating. Yes, that's absolutely true. If we're coating something that doesn't flex a huge amount, like a pair of tweezers, say, then we can do clever things where we can put down foundation layers which can take up some of the stress that's generated by flexing. It's almost like a laminated surface that you can put up to take up some of the stress, which will accommodate some of radius of curvature and flexing. So that's a very good question, and we can compensate for some flexing in the material.
Okay, great. Thanks, Alistair. So I have another question from another David, and apologies if I pronounce names incorrectly here. So David Yagrosi, and David has asked if the code, sorry, no, wrong question, right. So David's asked on surgical instruments, so if the coating was being used on surgical instruments, what effect on the chromium oxide layer or passivation layer would the coating, sorry, I'll start again because I've read it completely wrong. So on surgical instruments, what is the effect of the chromium oxide layer or passivation layer? If the surface is scratched or damaged, what is the impact? And would we have to be careful with regards to cleaning these? So, you know, looking at things like neutral pH detergents.
Yeah, there's a whole universe open up there. So first of all, we have to look under the chromium oxide. So you have your stainless steel, and we all know that stainless steel covers a huge area of different kinds of material with different corrosion properties. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the passivation layer, which is formed on top of that, and then the third thing is the PVD coating. So I'd answer by saying that's an area that still has to be studied intensively. So essentially, when we coat the passivized stainless steel with our PVD layer, we are almost passivating the passivation layer. What we have to be careful with is, and this is very important, any slight defect in a PVD coating or pinhole will allow transmission of water, humidity down there. Once you start digging under the PVD coating, you can cause delamination. And also we have to take into account corrosion of stainless steel as well through defects in a passivation layer. So that's an extremely good question, and I can't really give you an answer to say how careful we need to be with various cleaning agents, because I personally haven't done such studies yet, but in the future we will be looking at different PVD coatings and how they interact with passivation layers. Okay, thank you.
So we had some experience when I think we were looking at the multicolored coatings, and I think that was where you had a very thin layer of titanium dioxide, and they were found to sort of, you know, wash off quite easily or wear off quite easily. Is that obviously because, as you've mentioned, that they're attached very lightly to the surface to give that, you know, the color effect, if you like?
Yeah, though the titanium dioxide should be attached very strongly to the titanium nitride. The wear you might be seeing, was it a discoloration you were seeing?
Well, I think we've seen other attempts at this sort of coating where it's been multicolored and it just hasn't seemed to last particularly long, unless that's some sort of different electroplating that's colored. But it might not be the same process.
Yeah, it's possible to take a physical vapor deposition coating and then you can stick it into electrochemistry and colorize the coating, but you open the door for other problems if you do that.
Okay, great. So I don't know if we've got Hank there. Hank, have you obviously been listening hard in the background? Do you have some bits you'd like to pose to Alistair on the subject?
Sure, yeah. The primary question that came up for me on the discussion around the beetle, and I thought, that was a terrific part in the presentation here, tying in what nature has taught us and is continuing to teach us about this technology and the process. But I don't know if you ever covered or if I missed it. Is there a potential, if there's something out there that can be hydrophilic, is there a potential to create something that's hemophobic in terms of, pushing away blood and bioburden from instrumentation, for instance, that we coated it with to provide another, or to help in the decontamination process, I guess?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So I can use nature first of all to answer that. There's a phenomena known as the lotus leaf effect. If you look it up in Google, you'll see that if you look at a leaf, or especially a lotus leaf, you'll see that water droplets are almost spherical on that leaf because that leaf has evolved over millions of years to have a nano topology, which just water doesn't like sitting on. So what I'm going to be looking at in the future is my antimicrobial coatings, my diamond coatings, and see how I can impart on them controlled impurities and controlled surfaces to affect how blood, how plasma interacts with these surfaces, looking at cells and protein molecules as well, and then using my photonics lab to see how we can play around with that as well. So that's really exciting to me, yes.
In the transition from the technology, the photo that you showed at the beginning of the presentation, which the huge, machine that can do a kilometer a minute of the coating, et cetera, and all the way up, to now the benchtop technology that you designed. And I'm thinking in the sterile processing or the CSSD world, we have seen a similar technological transformation in terms of laser etching, and in a situation where before you would have to send your instruments out of the hospital, out of the department to be laser etched. Now you can do that with a small unit in the corner of your office, to etch your instrumentation. And I see that same process, potentially happening here if the design is created in a way that allows users, when they see perhaps the need to reapply, or perhaps it's new instrumentation, coming in where they have a particular coating that they desire to put on. If they have a unit and the training in the unit, that's something that could be done by some guy like me that doesn't really understand science, right?
Yeah. So the benchtop instrument we designed is primarily for academic research. It's a kind of look-see. The big instruments I showed are designed with money, the king, in mind, so that material could be produced extremely economically. So to make PVD coatings economical, they have to be done at very large scale, high speed to do that. So it's a mix and match of research, local production, economics. Where do you want to go with it? Yeah, but good question, yes.
Is there anything, it's my last question, Dan, if you want to move on to something, to any other questions, but in terms of the instrument, like the surgical instrument utilization of this, like you mentioned, the money part of it, is that currently where we're sitting in an industry from your perspective on why we don't see like more utilization of this technology in the healthcare space? Is it just because it's too cost prohibitive at this point, or is there just a lack of research and data out there to show the different applications? Where are we sitting on that spectrum?
Yeah, we're sitting at a very exciting point on the spectrum. It's more of a linear graph. So if we go back about 2 or 3 decades, physical vapor deposition was pretty expensive. I'm working with a Johnson Matthey, a chemical company, and we're looking at the cost of how things are done chemically and physically. So that's an interesting angle. There are companies around the world that are looking at the cost of producing coatings on medical devices, and the costs all depend on the scale. So if we scale up the number of instruments that we're coating, the price drop comes down dramatically. And we're at the point now where it's becoming economical to companies to coat using physical vapor deposition. The companies I work with are only buying bigger systems as time goes on, which will further reduce the cost.
I had just before I'm going to open the mic up, and if anybody else has any questions, I also selfishly had one more question just around the orthopedic implant side of things. I know you showed a picture of a hip, so obviously utilizing coating there from an antimicrobial perspective, would it be presumably to, first of all, physically provide a smoother device, so essentially that would be allow friction reduction and general better performance of an implant, but also presumably some sort of on-surface antimicrobial function as well?
Yeah, so we have to separate these out. So because the coatings are so thin, typically 500 nanometers, you tend to replicate the surface that you deposit onto very uniformly. So if I wanted to absolutely reduce friction, I would take a stainless steel and I would polish it until I got it so I could see my ugly face reflective and flat. And then I would think about coating with something like diamond, and you would have great scratch resistance and very little friction. The antimicrobial coating, it's not going to change the friction of the underlying material, but it will render that surface highly antimicrobial. So I've been working with surgeons who use metal implants, nails, plates, and screws, and there's the potential for microbes to enter the body somehow associated with that metal. If we can make those implants highly antimicrobial, it reduces the risk of infection after operation.
Wow, so that's, it's advancing the technology on all fronts. Thank you. I'm just going to attempt to open up the microphone. So I'm now unmuting all attendees. So if you'd like to ask a question directly, please do so. I think you'll have to probably select the tab and then probably activate your audio. Okay, so please go ahead. So if there's any questions out there, please feel free to perhaps just introduce yourself and then fire away.
Hi, Alistair. It's Dave Broderick here. I asked a question earlier on. Just a query really about the virus. You were mentioning that it gets deactivated if there's an electronic charge on the virus. So would you actually get a charge on it if the virus goes through an electric field, or does it have to be in contact with the surface?
There's got to be some proximity. So the exact physics of what's happening here isn't well known yet. So there's electric charge, but there's also high energy electrons around, which can drive chemical biological reactions, which can cause the damage to. People are beginning to understand what's happening in microbes, which I've been studying. And as you can appreciate, I've been learning a lot about virus particles over the past few weeks. So I'm certainly not an expert, and I can't say this is exactly how it works. We do believe, though, that if we provide a surface which has highly hot active electrons, if we can if we can kill a microbe, we believe that we can damage a virus, certainly the coating of the virus, which might disable it. But I'm not an expert in virology for sure.
Right, sure, no.
Thank you.
Okay. Right. Thanks, David. Anybody else on there would like to pose a question? Okay. If not, I had one more question myself, Alistair.
Sure.
So you mentioned Bill Keevil and Southampton and some of the projects that have been carried out down there. And I remember there was a project on, I think it was Selly Oak Hospital, on for copper coating on touch surfaces. So I think they coated like worktops, handles, you know, I think a lot of the sort of more basic touch surfaces, and had sort of great results for what they found. Obviously, you know, deactivating bugs and making everything. So is that sort of thing scalable? And you know, I appreciate it's not in relation to viruses directly, but
it is related to the virus, because copper oxide is known to be antiviral. So that's interesting. In terms of copper surfaces, you could make everything out of copper or one of the FDA approved copper alloys, and that would be antimicrobial, possibly antiviral. But kitting out a whole hospital with copper or an alloy is pretty expensive. Second thing you can do is take stainless steel and coat it with copper, and that would be antimicrobial, but copper itself is not durable. It tarnishes. Once it tarnishes and turns green, it's still highly antimicrobial, but it needs some care and it will wear out eventually. So you're absolutely right. Copper has its place. So potentially for taps, for touch plates, copper is certainly a good thing to do. What we also have to note, though, is that in the wrong part of the body, copper oxide is extremely toxic. So it's all a balance about how much copper we use and where we use it. So what I'm trying to do with my coating, which is a metal oxide, is use oxide versions of biocompatible elements such as titanium to make this antimicrobial surface. And then we're going to run inflammatory biocompatibility studies on such surfaces to make sure that they're very friendly to the human body.
Okay, great. And one thing you mentioned about being friendly to the human body, obviously with the new medical device regulation, I'm pretty sure that a lot of anything that is around nanoparticles is considered to sort of bump the device up to class 3, because I think there's perhaps fears about the leaching of nanoparticles. Obviously, you know, there's a wide range of usages potentially from drug delivery to orthopedic implants. So are there things you can do to ensure that is, you know, that the coatings are robust enough so they don't leach?
There's a very important discrimination to make. So our antimicrobial coating is nanostructured. It's not nanoparticles. So there are no nanoparticles there. There's a nanotopology. When it comes to nanoparticles, we're just beginning to open up the spectrum of safety aspects of nanoparticles. For instance, if I take a gold nanoparticle with 10 atoms and run all my safety studies on that, it would take a very long time. If I then take one atom out of that gold nanoparticle and make it 9 atoms, it will have fundamentally different properties, which would have to be studied. So we're really just opening that. So we'll just have to be very careful with what we do with nanoparticles. In Inverness, I'm working with Professor Ian Megson, who's an expert in nanotoxicology. I will be generating nanoparticles, and the first thing we will do will be to study their impact on cells in terms of inflammation and damage.
Okay, great, thank you.
Dan, sorry, could I sneak another one in?
Sure, of course, go ahead.
Okay. Have you done any coating of PEEK, ester ketone? It's biocompatible material that has been used quite a bit now in implants, or at least it will be used quite a bit in implants.
I have in the past, not recently. So, but yes, I know this can be done by PVD. One of the things I may not have mentioned is that decades ago, PVD generated quite a heat load, so coating plastics was very difficult. Nowadays, we've taken out the heat load. We use more electrostatics. So if the plastic itself allows itself to survive in a vacuum chamber without outgassing too much, then it can be coated by PVD.
Right. Okay.
So high density plastics are a good one that can be done. Teflon, etc.
Okay. Good. Thanks.
Great. I think from my perspective, that's probably exhausted the questions I had. One thing I would like to say is I'm grateful that that Hank and the Beyond Clean team are going to put this up as a video on their YouTube channel. So if there's a colleague you'd like to share Alistair's presentation with, they can log on and view that again, which is excellent. Are there any more questions out there if anybody wants to come? And otherwise we'll conclude. I would just like Hank, if possible, if you wouldn't mind popping back up on the screen just to give me further beard envy among these two. Yeah. Would you be able to tell us a bit about your upcoming expo, your electronic expo, if I could describe it in any worse terms? I'm sure you can provide a bit better information.
Yeah, so anyone who hasn't heard, the week of May 11th, we're hosting what's called the SPX 2020 Virtual Vendor Expo. And that's going to be a week-long event spotlighting vendors in the sterile processing and medical device reprocessing industry with all the new, cool, innovative things that are coming out, just like this presentation today, really pushing the boundaries of what we know is possible and what could be possible and what is, coming out now that there's already products out there to make our lives easier and our patients safer. So that's going to be a 100% digital event, all on social media. So the easiest way to follow it will be to register for free at spx2020.eventbrite.com, or you can follow any of the Beyond Clean social media pages on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and then of course the YouTube channel, which is just youtube.com/beyondclean.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'd certainly look forward to that. Really grateful to both of you for obviously coming on today. Amazing presentation, Alistair, and hopefully we can hear more.
Thank you.
As I mentioned, my idea is to nominate some other people to do some presentations, but I think in a couple of weeks' time we're planning on doing something around endoscopes and rigid endoscopes. So that will be the next one. So we'll share some information on that. But thanks to everybody for listening in, and we'll share the recording ourselves as well as through Beyond Clean. And if there's anything else you guys like to add before we finish up?
Just thank you for inviting me. Really enjoyed it. I'm broadcasting from my summer house.
All right, be safe, guys.
I think it's the way to go, the summer house. And I apologise for these horrendous headphones that I've been using, which are my son's Fortnite headphones. So he'll be pleased to get them back in a minute. Okay. Take care, everybody, and stay safe. Thank you. Bye.